We need some positivity in this show. We're going to talk about all the things going well, why we shouldn't panic, what Mertz is doing, stock up on a couple players, and why the Badgers still have a really good chance to win the Big Ten West. We're going to talk about all of that and more on today's Locked On Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to Locked On Badgers. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings, your team every single day here as we build this community. Really appreciate everybody continuing to tune in, continuing to support. And I think this is a show we have to do, right? Like we've been negative, we've been frustrated, we've been sad. That Washington State loss cut deep, right? It was a deflating loss. But, I've heard several coaches, both basketball and football over the years, say some iteration, some variation of the following. It's never as good as you think it is, and it's never as bad as you think it is, right? Watch the film, see what happened, understand the breakdowns, or watch the film, see what happened, and realize you're not quite as good as you thought you were. There's always middle ground in this stuff. In losses, there's always good stuff, and in wins, there's always bad stuff, right? So, we get for obvious reasons, we get very fixated on the win-loss, the score. But we got a lot of positives we got to unpack here 2 games in, and a lot of things that, not that you can just take out a loss, but just ignore the fact that we lost to Washington State. A lot of the other things here are pretty optimistic, positive, exciting. So we're going to get into it. This is a positivity show. No negativity here. We are happy and excited going into week 3 and a lot of good stuff to talk about. So let's start here. And I think this is the obvious big one. And I don't know if it's talked about enough. Graham Mertz is good. Period. Right? New sentence. He's been really good. Mertz is currently 28th nationally in passing rating, 33rd nationally in completion percentage. That's 4th in the Big Ten in both categories out of 14 teams. We talked off season statistically, and probably even by the eye test, you could have argued Graham Mertz was the worst quarterback stop in the Big Ten last year. I mean, if he wasn't the worst, he was at the very bottom of that barrel. And he's 4th right now in several statistical categories. He's completing almost 70% of his passes. He's taking care of the ball. He's making good decisions. He's moving in the pocket. He's scrambling to pick up a first down when he needs to. He's 33rd nationally in completion percentage. So this is such a big development that we're not talking about enough because we lost to Washington State, because the bottom line said you're 1-1. But before the season, if you were to tell any Badger fan, even the optimistic ones, that Graham Mertz is going to be a top 4-ish, top 5-ish Big Ten quarterback, he's going to be top 30 nationally in a bunch of categories. Because if you remember coming into this season, what did we feel good about, Badger fans? Think about it. What did you feel good about coming in this year that gave you optimism, that made you feel good? You thought the running game would be really good. The defense would be good. You loved the transfers. You loved obviously the idea of Bob Bostad going to the O-line and Braylon Allen running behind him, and Garendo is back and healthy, and Ches. Well, all of those other pieces are still there, right? All the other things that we were excited about, that we were optimistic about, are still there. And now we have all those things that we shouldn't lose the optimism on those things, over the course of one fluky game. But now you have those things that you were already optimistic about that I don't think are flukes. I don't think we were falsely optimistic about those things, is what I should say. Plus, you have a developing story where Graham Mertz might be a really good quarterback in this system with Bobby Engram. You just have to be excited about that. You have to be, because if he is this, so we have this is all short sample size stuff. We have 2 games to go on, right? So you have to take it with a grain of salt. But if he is this, right, and he continues to play like this, I have faith that the offensive line is going to come around under Bob Bostad. There's a bunch of new players there, a bunch of new players. We've talked about it. And it's not just new players, it's players in different spots. We've talked about this a ton. Tyler Beach, it's his first year at guard. Fertney, his first year as a full-time starter. Riley Mahlman was his first year starting. Logan Brown, his first year now with Mahlman out. Jack Nelson wasn't left tackle last year. Like, there are so many moving pieces here. I think we underestimated the amount of time it was going to take to get that unit to gel, right? But I still think it's going to be good. I think it's only going to get better with Bob Bostad. I still think the running game is going to be a strength. I think the defense is still really good. I love Jim Leonard. All these other things I was really excited about. And now I'm starting to believe in Graham Mertz. Yeah. Yeah, that's a real reason to be positive. It's a real reason to be optimistic. And then you look at this quartet of receivers. When was the last time you felt this good about the depth at receiver? I mean, we have felt this good about, receiver number one many times or better. Like Quintus Cephas was a stud, right? Quintus Cephas would be the number one receiver on this team right now, but when have we had four guys we really liked? Countess Lewis looks great. Marcus Allen, even though he needs to do a little better job, snatching that ball, holding in, he looks like a total dude out there. Chimere Dike is a one. Skylar Bell looks explosive, and then you still have Dean Ingram, who we haven't even really gotten involved yet. I think you feel pretty good 1 through 5, and then Clay Cundiff is back, and he looks great so far. So this whole passing game, all the components of it, going even down to the pass blocking, you got to be optimistic here. And when you start talking about it and thinking logically, and when you start getting 24, 48 hours away from that loss and that pain of just losing it to a team you shouldn't lose to, right? And it's also an entire off season of building up into this point, right? It's an entire off season of looking forward to these games and thinking you're going to be 3-0. So it's not just a loss against Washington State. It's like an entire offseason's worth of optimism that went up in smoke seemingly. But when you step away from that a little bit and you start to look at, I still like all those components of the team, but this passing game might be really good. And then if you can combine those things, telling you, there's something there. I want to talk a little bit about a couple players stock up. But remember, this is the optimistic positivity show. We're spreading light into the darkness of Badger fandom right now. 3 players to stock up. Kamoi Latu. I know he missed a big tackle again in Washington State against Nakia Watson that led to a touchdown. That ended up really final score of that game that provided the margin for victory for Washington State. That was a big miss for Latu, but did you also see how much ground he covered on that play? Did you see the punt coverage play he made where he just gobbled up that cougar in the open field? He is physically a dude. And that's something that when we had John Garcia from Sports Illustrated on the show talking about it, he said Latu is a dude. There was a game against USC last year where played for Utah. Kamali just ate up USC. So I've been so impressed with physically how he moves, how big and strong he is. I think we found a big time impact player there. And when Hunter Wohler comes back, you'd have Torchio Wohler, and I think Latu is probably that third guy. And I'm very excited about him. Stock up Clay Cundiff. He looks great. He looks phenomenal. Coming off that bad injury last year, he had 2 touchdown catches last week. I know he had the fumble. He's got to clean that up. After the game, he took full accountability for that. That's all you can do. But he's big, physical. He gets in and out of his routes well. Good hands. I really like him. He's very much in that vein of kind of an Owen Daniels. I'm trying to think of, that kind of all around Garrett Graham, kind of that all around tight end that can block, that can get out in the intermediate area and catch some passes, red zone threat, run after the ball a little bit, physical, good hands. And Wisconsin hasn't had that dude in a little while. I don't think Jake Ferguson was that dude. He was more of a receiving threat, not quite as big or physical. Certainly a great player, obviously. He's a 4th-round pick of the Cowboys, but Cundiff looks great. And stock up on Keontae Lewis, right? That deep threat that this team needs. He's another transfer that we have for 3 more years. 2 more years after this one, I should say. But Keontae Lewis and Kamoi Latu, those are tremendous impacts in the transfer portal for Wisconsin, already paying dividends. So let's wrap that up like positivity show. Mertz looks legit. Some of the impact transfers look like legit impact transfers, and we still have confidence in all the other pieces around Mertz. I think we got to feel good going forward here if you look at it through that lens. Coming up, we're going to talk about one of the biggest reasons Wisconsin's still going to win the Big Ten West. You're going to want to stick around for that. Let me know if you agree or disagree, but that's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and information. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, podcasts, this week's games. And, it has live in-game betting, has futures betting. We've talked about the future stuff a lot. I don't know if you're all off of Wisconsin's over-under for this year, but they can still hit that. And if you have a great read, basketball's coming up, right? If you have a great read for NBA, NCAA basketball coming up, now is a great time to do it. Do it responsibly, but have some fun with it. Also, live Vegas games, roulette, blackjack. You're going to find all of that on BetOnline. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your sports news. Head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right. Once again, thank you so much for tuning into the positivity show. I'm excited to do it. I'm a positive, optimistic guy at heart, even though my fandom sometimes takes advantage of that. Like, my fandom can sometimes turn me a little cynical, but I'm an optimistic guy at heart. I'm an optimist. I try to find the glass half full. And I don't think you really have to search that hard right now. I know it seems like it, but there's a lot here that we can be positive about. Let's talk Big Ten West. Why are the Badgers still in a great spot? It's quite frankly because the Big Ten West is terrible. I mean, listen, lump Wisconsin in there if you want. There's no team around Wisconsin right now that is saying, oh, man, we're really scared of the Badgers. But you look at Northwestern. Northwestern beat Nebraska, a team that's fired their head coach, and then they lost to a Duke team that nobody thinks is very good. Nebraska just fired their coach after losing to an FCS team at home. And listen, they'll get new coach energy. That happens a lot, but that's still a team that just lost to an FCS team at home. Okay, that's not getting turned around in a year. Wisconsin's going to beat the brakes off Nebraska. Iowa has the worst offense. I mean, Iowa's offense makes last year's Wisconsin team look like the Andre Ward college teams, right? I mean, Iowa has scored 14 points this year, and more than 2 of those have come off safeties from their defense. That they are terrible offensively. Spencer Petras, their quarterback, who Kirk Ferentz has come out and said we're sticking with him, as completing 42% of his passes. They are just a train wreck, right? Who else do you got? We talked Nebraska. Illinois is okay, but they lost to Indiana, and they really haven't beaten anybody else. Minnesota's played absolutely nobody, right? Absolutely nobody. Tanner Morgan looks good, but they have to come to Madison in a revenge spot for Wisconsin. I said it from the jump. Wisconsin's winning that game. Okay, they're winning that game. Now, listen, Purdue looks fine. They always have ways of putting points up on the board, but wake me up when Purdue beats Wisconsin, because it's been a minute. So listen, it is what it is, and I'm not trying to it's not like this is something I'm excited about, right? Where Wisconsin could win by default because the rest of the division kind of stinks, but that's also kind of the truth of it. Who do we think coming into this year were the biggest challengers for Wisconsin? I heard Nebraska, I heard Iowa, I heard Northwestern, and I heard Minnesota, right? Well, it's not Nebraska. I mean, right? They've lost 2 games, fired their head coach. It's not Iowa. They can't score the ball. They can't score the ball against defenses that aren't as good as ours. It's not Northwestern. They just lost to Duke. And quite frankly, their impressive win against Nebraska doesn't look as impressive. And it's maybe Minnesota. Minnesota's look good, but Minnesota's played absolutely nobody. So I don't know. I really don't know what to make of them one way or the other, but I think we can very fairly say this is not the Big Ten West that at times we have said, hey, this is an underrated division, a lot of good teams, they're not getting their due. No, this is a bad division right now, with probably Wisconsin included. Let's just be completely fair and real here. But can Wisconsin be the best of the bad division? I think they can. I think they're the most talented team. And certainly if Graham Mertz is playing like this, yeah, with getting Minnesota at home, if Graham Mertz is playing like this, yeah, I think they can still win the Big Ten West because nobody else scares me. So, again, it's not something to be, as I mentioned, like, you don't want to pat yourself on the back, if one of the reasons you win the division is that the rest of the division is just pretty terrible, but that's also a truth. Like, we can speak it real here. That's part of what is happening in the Big Ten West, and those divisions are going away soon. So let's take advantage of that while we can. So I think that's a big aspect of what's happening here is the Big Ten itself is top heavy. It's been top heavy for a while, but I think the Big Ten West is worse than it has been in several years. And Wisconsin's going to get better kind of as we get closer to the meat of that schedule. Because the other thing I want to talk about is there are so many young players. We talked offensive line, but I want to talk about the other portion of this that I think is going to help Wisconsin the more and more this season goes on. And that is the fact that they have so many young pieces, so many new pieces in different spots, so many new coaches. The longer this season goes on, I think the more and more that's going to gel. And I think we underestimated that. I did. I'll be honest. I'll be real. I'll take that one. I got that one wrong. I think that we underestimated the amount of new faces, not new players on the team, but players in new roles on defense, right? Replacing Henningsen, both inside linebackers, the entire secondary essentially outside of Torchio. And even he's in a new role. Like, that takes time. We talked about the offensive line shifts, but you also have basically 4 new receivers in new spots. Like Chimere DK was here last year, Marcus Allen, but they're in new spots now. DK is the one. Allen is in a much more prominent spot. And, Keontae Lewis is a transfer coming in. Skylar Bell's in a more prominent role. Clay Cundiff is that number one receiving tight end now. Everything is different on that side. It's a new fullback. You have a new quarterbacks coach, offensive coordinator, tight ends coach, running backs coach, offensive line coach. Paul Chris isn't calling plays. So much has changed that I don't think we really fully talked about it enough. I didn't talk about it enough. And again, I'll take the blame on that. Or really appreciated that this might take 2 or 3 games to gel. And in that lens, when you look at it through that light, maybe the Washington State game isn't such a bad loss, right? Maybe that's part of the gelling process. And by the way, if you are going to drop a game early, okay, and don't get me wrong, if you're listening and you're pulling your hair out, I am not saying it's okay to drop that game. That game was a clunker. It was on the coaches. It was on the players. We weren't prepared. And Wisconsin is a better team than Washington State, and they lost at home. Okay, so let me be real. That was a problem. It's a bad loss. Nothing I'm saying is trying to whitewash that or ignore it or, minimize it, whatever. But let's also be real. And like I said, sometimes there's reasons that things happen instead of just, it's a bad loss, move on. Maybe it was a bad loss because we're still in our gelling period. Like we're still in a spot where the young coaches, the young players and players in new spots are figuring out a way to win together, a way to move forward together. There has, maybe guys like Keanu Benton and Nick Herbig, John Torchio, or, Joe Tippmann are finding that leadership void and a way to fill it. So I don't think that's an impossibility. It could also be this is just a sloppy team and, it's going to be a bad year, but not on this show. This is a positivity show. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a lot of changes, and sometimes those changes take some time to get, aligned. We've all seen that in parts of our lives. If you go to a new company or if new people are hired or, like new dynamics take a while. That's not just a sports thing. That's a life thing. So I would caution throwing in the towel too early on this team because the division is terrible, because there's a bunch of new pieces, new parts, that still might need to come together. I think all that could be a factor. Coming up, we're going to talk a little bit as well about, weird things that happen in sports and why you maybe don't want to overreact to it and why losing to Washington State might be one of the better things that happens to this team. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. Thank you guys so much listening to Locked On Badgers, tuning in. If you're finding us on the pod and listening in your car somewhere, that's awesome. Really appreciate y'all. If you're watching on YouTube and you're checking me out in my barn back here, really appreciate that as well. As we build this community, check out the Discord. That thing's growing. Again, we do giveaways on the Discord every weekend. We go live every weekend after every game. And I highly encourage everybody to join those streams, jump on the show, join the show, throw your thoughts out there. Because this is all about building up the community, getting your voices out there. There's so many smart Badger fans. And I'm all about getting those voices out there, talking it up, chopping it up. This week's giveaway is a Chimere DK autographed rookie card. So join the Discord to get in on that. Let me know in the comments below if you think I'm crazy for having a positivity show coming off a Washington State loss. Are all these things nonsense? Am I just seeing flowers and rainbows here when I should be walking through a cemetery? Let me know. I'm here to chop it up. Maybe these reasons are BS, and maybe there's really not that much to be positive about. Let's talk about this. So I'm not a Packers fan. I'm a Niners fan. And, I'm sure Packers fans could find a similar game to the one I'm about to bring up. It was a Niners game. There was a 49ers game with Steve Young, and it was early in their Super Bowl year, and they lost to the Eagles. They got manhandled. They just got trashed. And Steve Young was pulled out early in that game. He had got into a yelling match on the sideline, and it was just this whole to-do. It looked terrible. The product looked awful. That team ended up being a great team. And Young and a lot of 49ers always credited that loss as a wake-up call, that loss as it was kind of a get-right moment. And I think some of that could be this loss with Washington State if the right switches are flipped here. So, what happened in that game, right? It was special teams. It was penalties. It was, I think, some play calling issues, and it was a couple turnovers. Now, turnovers are notoriously fluky. Now, statistics will show this. Studies will show this. A team that has a bunch of turnovers one year is not more likely to have the same amount of turnovers the next year because they're so fluky. They're so random at times. And clean teams don't turn it over, but Sometimes balls just get tipped. Sometimes someone is up from behind you and punches it out. Like a lot of that is fluky. Okay. So I'm not going to count on that to continue happening. Special teams. Well, what changed this offseason? Right? Like what changes the special teams coach, Chris Herring was the special teams coach. Now he's the tight ends coach. So whether you thought Chris Herring was doing a good job or not, there is a transition period for the special teams unit as well. It's a new coach, a new group of coaches working with special teams. Tyler Melhoff is in there, I'm sure, working with the kicker. There's a new kicker, new punt return. Like there's a lot of new pieces here that, much like all the other positions, need to gel. And then we talked about penalties. This is young players. I think the more this team plays, the more that stuff is going to get cleaned up. So again, we talked about early season aberrations, early season kind of blips in the radar. I think the Washington State game could be one where the coaches take a step back and they have to say, okay, maybe we need to reevaluate a little bit what we're doing on special teams. And maybe we need to adjust our game calling a little bit. I think the pass game was working, and maybe the coaches are still adjusting to that. Maybe they didn't expect the running game to struggle like it has, and for Graham Mertz to look as good as he's done. So let's see how their play calling may adjust going forward to that. Let's see how the play calling may adapt going forward to that. Now that Graham Mertz has played so well, this could be, as much as for the players, this could be a wake up call for Paul Chryst and Bobby Engram, right? To get a little more aggressive, to throw a little bit more. Wisconsin ran the ball a lot, 1st and 10 last week against Washington State. They ran the ball a lot into stacked boxes. Maybe after a week of watching the film, after seeing Graham Mertz play really well, we see some changes. We see a little bit more of an aggressive approach. So this could be a get right, kind of a wake-up call for not just the players. Keanu Benton talked about it. He said we folded a little bit. So I had to find my voice, that leadership spot. That's not what Wisconsin's about. This is a great opportunity in a game that's not a Big Ten game, that doesn't impact the division or conference race, that doesn't really do anything to change any of the realistic goals Wisconsin had coming into this year. This is a game that could serve as a catalyst going forward for, okay, that's out of the system. Now let's clean this up. Let's play better. And it wouldn't shock me if that happens. Starting this weekend, let's see a clean game. Let's see special teams hit some kicks, right? Avoid the costly penalties. Graham Mertz continue to build on the momentum. All that happens. I think you can go into Ohio State almost saying Washington State was an aberration, and we're right where we figured we would be, which is still going to be obviously it's still going to be a significant underdog against Ohio State in Columbus. But you would have been that if you beat Washington State anyway. So what's the difference, right? If you had beaten Washington State 24-10, you're still going to be a 13-point underdog to Ohio State in Columbus. So in that sense, I don't know how much it really changes as long the Washington State loss. I don't know how much it really changes as long as the coaching staff and players take the right lessons from it and adapt. And as long as they do that, I could see this being still a very successful season based on Graham Mertz playing well, the Big Ten West being frankly terrible, and a lot of new pieces, both from the player standpoint and the coaching standpoint, that are going to continue to gel. That stuff should continue to get better and cleaner the longer the season goes on. Whereas other teams, other coaching staffs are more solidified, right? Wisconsin can make up some ground there, if that makes sense, as the season goes on, as those coaches in new spots, kind of settle into their roles, as the players in new spots kind of settle into their roles. So positivity show. You guys let me know. Let me know what you think. If I'm talking crazy, or if you're starting to feel some of this. We're a couple days out from week 3. I think this is a good get right spot. And then we're going to head into that huge matchup against Columbus or against Ohio State in Columbus. And we'll see what Wisconsin's made of. That is the positivity show, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Join the Discord if you want. It's a great opportunity to interact with other Badger fans and qualify for some free swag we're giving away. With that, after this show, go check out Locked On Big Ten. Nate Dickinson is going to take you all around the Big Ten Conference to all of our rivals, latest news, headlines, notes. It's a really good show to keep you up to date on what's going on in the conference. And with that, on Wisconsin, let's destroy New Mexico State and get into week 4 as healthy as possible. Thanks, everybody. On Wisconsin.